Hey, today I'm starting a new series called Crits by Liz, where I take a look at student design work and critique it from a visual design and a Figma perspective. This is the file that I received today. The problem that we're working on is how might a public transportation app provide users with transparent and reliable information regarding the bus schedule, delays, and arrival and departure times. So I think the problem statement is pretty straightforward. There are a lot of examples that you can look at for visual design inspiration, like Google Maps, City Mapper, Apple Maps, etc. Let's go ahead and get started. Actually, before we get started, one thing. I noticed that this is using a pretty strange screen size. I thought it was a made up screen size, but I realized that it actually belongs to the iPhone 8, which is an older iPhone. I know some designers like to design for the oldest screen because it tends to be smaller, but I think one thing that might help, especially if you want to put this in your case study, is to use a newer iPhone screen size. The newer iPhones tend to be a little bit longer, and so if you put it in a phone like this, then the designs will feel a little bit more modern and contemporary. So that's a small note. Also, the newer phones have something called the dynamic island or the notch at the top, and adding that into your designs will make it feel more contemporary. Let's go ahead and get started and dive into some of the details of the flow. The first thing I'm noticing here on this first page is that there are a lot of different icons being used. I'm not sure if they're all from the same icon set. I highly recommend sticking to one set of icons for your entire design because then the design will feel a lot more consistent. So specifically zooming in here, notice how the home icon is filled. This one is a stroke only icon. This one is a stroke only icon. This one is filled and this one is filled. Typically, you want to be consistent across all the icons. I think these might be from different libraries as well, I'm not sure. One library that I like using that's really easy to integrate with Figma is called Feather Icons. There's actually a plugin for it called Feather Icons, and you notice that they have a lot of different stroke only icons. And so if you're into the stroke only icons, this is a great set to experiment with. So for example, if I were to replace the icons here with the icons from Feather Icons, I never know if this is going to work because people organize their Figma files a little bit differently. So here's home. I'm going to go ahead and do this really quickly so that I can show you what it looks like. But typically what I would do is, we're not going to cover components today, but it looks like this should actually, I'm going to do a little Figma detour. I think if I was making this component, I'm going to start from scratch so that you all can see. But if I was making this component, what I would do first is I would create an auto layout group with these two elements here. I'm actually going to start over and ungroup this so that there's no background. Okay, now we're here. Okay, so what I would do is, this is the icon. So I have this icon and I have this text. These are my two main elements that I'm using for this navigation bar that I will copy here so we can look at it. So what I would do first is I would combine these two items into an auto layout group like this. I selected both of them, did Shift A. Then I would adjust the spacing. 4 pixels seems okay. I usually use the 8 pixel to 4, sometimes 4 pixel system. And so you can either use like 8, 4, 16, etc. Really up to your personal taste. I don't think it really matters that much. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this a few times so that I have all the different pages. So favorites, trips, settings, and profile. Then I'm going to space them out. So I put these into an auto layout group. So this is called navbar. I'm going to go ahead and space it out like this. That seems okay. Next, these ones are all gray, and so I'm going to go ahead and adjust the colors here to all be gray. The way I did that really fast is I copied the style of this text here by doing Command-Option-C, and then I pasted it onto these 4 here. Next, I'm going to look for all the different icons in here. So let's do this. It is really common to do, also this icon doesn't really make sense for trips. Maybe there's like a suitcase icon. Oh, there isn't. Okay, I guess we're sticking with a piece of paper. Oh no, I have to look for a different icon. Okay, give me 1 second. Maybe there's a plane. Okay, this is the hard thing about using a smaller icon set like this. Sometimes you might have to make a compromise. And since, oh, let's do this. We'll do the map. Great. So map icon, settings is usually this. One side note, I usually don't think settings deserves to be I don't think settings deserves to be its own tab because people typically don't visit settings that often. And so you could consider merging it with the profile page if you want. And so notice how now when I change the icons to all be consistent, it feels more like a family with each other. If I wanted to spend more time polishing this, I might consider making the icons smaller or adjusting the typography. I can also change this to be the same shade of blue that you used up here as well to show that it's highlighted. But now it feels a lot more consistent because I am using the same icons. Another thing to note is that I guess these are also gray, and so I should probably do that as well. A quick way to change that is to use the selection colors down here, where you select a group of elements like this, then you copy the color. So these are all black up here. I'm gonna change these to be the same 70% gray that you have up here as well to kind of preserve the style that you had earlier. Finally, you'll notice that this bar has like a slight stroke at the top, like here. So an easy way to add that is right now, since these are all an auto layout group, you can actually add a fill. So now there's a white fill. And you can do this with padding. So I'm gonna go ahead and check what the padding looks like right now. So it looks like it's 6 and 12. I'm gonna go ahead and try 8 on the top and 16 on the bottom. I'm also going to not delete the original design and put this on the side so you can see the difference, but I'm gonna go ahead and put this down here. Oops, I pasted it in the wrong place. Put it down here, and I'm going to increase the width of this to fill the area, and then I'm going to change the alignment so that it's in the center of the bar like this. Looking at this now in context, I think I would probably add a little bit more spacing on the top like this. And then there's also a border on the top as well. So what I would do is I would add a stroke around the entire thing. I'm not going to talk about colors right now, but typically how I would make this is I would use a really thin stroke like this, and then I would change the top border to be a gray. So that's kind of how I might clean this up. You can also consider changing the spacing between the elements. You can also use auto, which will automatically space out the elements evenly across the row. And then you can add padding on the left and the right side as well. That's also another option of laying this out. Another thing that I changed that's really minor is I removed this rounded corner. I think a lot of times people feel like they need to round the corners of the tab bar, but that's not a really common iOS style. It's better to keep it flat like this. Also, a lot of people now remove the stroke at the top as well because it feels a little bit cleaner. So you can also try that if you want. Okay, that's enough of the Figma detour. The next thing I want to share is this current location tooltip. This is actually not necessary, I think, for most map apps. The reason why is because if you open up most map apps, people are very used to having this blue bubble that shows where you are. If you open like Apple Maps, there's a blue bubble, Google Maps, blue bubble, everything has like some sort of bubble, could be a different color. And so I don't think it's needed to label, so I would recommend deleting it like this. Also simplifies the design. Another stylistic suggestion. So right now there's a drop shadow that's pretty visible on this blue dot. One way that you could think about improving this is you could, instead of a blue dot, you could try adding a stroke. Oh, I don't know how this works. Okay, it's a group. But you could try adding a stroke around this element like this. That is the same shade of blue. And then put it outside. But you can try adding it so that's a little bit transparent like this. A lot of places will do this and then it'll kind of like pulsate if you're moving around. So that's another option that's a little bit, I think, less stylized than the drop shadow, which kind of can feel a little bit more dated or feel more like Google material design. Okay, so most of the changes have been pretty minimal right now. I'm noticing this notifications icon. Looking at the app, I don't know what that does. So one suggestion I have is maybe you can move it to the bottom bar if you need it, or I recommend deleting it, especially if it's a case study project and you don't mention notifications at all. Having a more minimal approach will be really helpful. Okay, we're finally onto this bar here. I looked at a few different map apps recently, and I noticed that most of the map apps have the bar at the very top so that the map can really be the center of attention and the focus. And so I'd recommend maybe moving it up like this. I think there are some uh, questions I have about how this top bar was designed. And so one note is that you can actually use auto layout to create this bar, and it might make it a little bit easier if you want to scale this app in the future. So taking a look at this, I think I deleted something. Oops, let me try using the one that exists already. But when I resize it like this, it doesn't resize well. It kind of gets really, really smushed. But if you use auto layout, you'll make a component that can resize to many elements, or not many elements, but many different sizes. So I'm going to show you how I would do that. So maybe I'll just draw it here. So I'll copy this over. One thing I did notice actually about this text box is that it uses a fixed size. And typically for Figma, and when you're designing stuff, you never want to use the fixed size box. You typically want to start with auto width because then the box will be the same size as the text within, and it really helps with alignment. I'm going to go ahead and copy this down. It is still in the group, so I'll drag it out of the group. And I'm going to draw it here. It might be kind of hard to see, but hopefully it'll be okay. Again, I'm going to stick to the same icon set. These icons tend to be a little bit like bulkier, so you don't have to use them, but it's easier for this demo's purposes. So let's go ahead and put this icon here. It looks like it's a gray color. So, ooh, that's not what I wanted to do. It looks like it's a gray color. Ooh, it's a different gray color than the stuff down there. One quick way, I'm getting so distracted, but one quick way to change the gray across everything is to, again, use selection colors. So it looks like there's a lot of colors going on in general on this page. I don't know if I did that or if it was like this before, but if you don't feel like using like color styles, you can go in through the selection colors panel and change all your colors here. So I'm going to go ahead and make all my, let's stick with like I kind of like using an off black like this. So let's make all our blacks this color here that I just invented. And then what I like to do is I like to make all the grays a variation of the black. So like this. And then I also like making these grays a variation of the black as well. Okay, so now it's a little bit more consistent. Okay, enough of getting distracted. Now I'm going to Shift A and I'm going to combine these two into one group. I do notice that this icon, because it's a stroke, when I use the transparent colors, it does this weird overlap, but we're going to ignore that for today. So I'm going to combine these into an auto layout group. I'm going to call it left side. You can probably come up with a better name, but that's what I came up for now. And I'll do 8 pixels of spacing between these elements for now. Then I'm going to find a heart. I don't really know what the heart means. It's a little bit confusing. I'm assuming it means favorite places, but I'm not sure. I think for usability wise, it might be useful to have the favorites kind of appear in line somewhere, like maybe they're like cards, or maybe they're in line here. There's like a list of them up here, because I don't know. Think about it. I don't know if there needs to be such a big focus on the map if there's nothing in the map and you're not like looking for different things in the map specifically, but that's more of like a UX idea. Okay, back to this anyway. So this has 8 pixels, and then what I'm going to do next is I'm going to combine these two as well, and I'm going to space them out, let's say 16 for now. So right now I have this group here. It's an auto layout group. I'm going to call this text input. Next, I'm going to add a background. So you notice I have the white background, and then I'm going to round the corners by like 10. I think this is 10-ish. Okay, now I'm going to increase the width of this to fit the area. I always like to check the spacing as I go. One thing I'm noting is that the margins on the page are pretty wide for a iOS app. Typically, people do 16 or maybe 24. So I recommend going a little bit more to the edges of the page. There's a lot of space, and so you can definitely use it. Now it looks really bad, but we're not done yet. So gonna add padding around like this. We can try maybe something like this. I'm gonna use 12. And then we're going to change this area on the left to be a fill container for the resizing options. And then we're gonna change this to fill container as well. And so you notice that now the where to section expands to fill the area that remains. Okay, now we have this bar, and then we have the heart that is blue. I'll keep it blue for now. I'm not sure about it, but we can keep it blue for now. Okay, so now we have the search bar. Yay. The last thing is that I noticed a drop shadow on this. The drop shadow is pretty harsh, and so again, things to try. You can try using a stroke like this. That's an option. You can also try adding a really faint drop shadow like this. You could try like a really faint one that's pretty blurred and not that far removed from the header. That's also an option, but typically for drop shadows, I recommend not using one that's so harsh because then it really stands out. And so here's how the design changed from the right to the left. One idea to consider is there are a lot of plugins for maps right now, and you might be able to find a map that is a little bit more colorful and adds more flavor to your design if you want to. Okay, so that is the first screen. I think, again, from a UX perspective, I think there's more here. So I'd recommend looking at things like City Mapper and thinking about if there's a way where you can add more content here. Like when someone comes, they want to know the bus schedule, they want to know the delays, they want to know their arrival and departure times, but right now I don't see any of that on this page, and so it might be important to reconsider. I just realized something, actually. I just realized that there's a tab called favorites, and this is also a heart. So maybe since there's a tab for favorites, maybe the favorites doesn't need to exist here or vice versa. I would think about that too. Okay, on to the next screen. So I think what happens, I looked at the prototype, what happens is you click on this and then you search and then this pops up. I think this interaction is a little bit weird because typically what happens is when you search for something, the content that is generated appears on top of the map so that you can see the path. So for example, I'm going to get chaotic and just move everything around. So say I started with this is like the map and you search for something, this thing, this bar appears it like, oh, this is not a group. So this thing will appear here, and then I think there's stuff that's locked. Okay. This stuff here will appear like down here-ish. This is kind of an estimate. I haven't looked at a map app recently, so, well, I have, but not right now. So the stuff will kind of appear down here, I think. And then you can kind of maybe like scroll through the options, and then you can also, the map zooms out, and then you see like a little like path. This is a really chaotic path, but you see a path of like point A to point B. And so that's like pretty standard with a map app. And so I would highly recommend doing something that's more standard. I think having a separate page like this is not as common, and it's a little bit confusing because then you can't see the path and you can't really see and analyze the specific options. And so I'd recommend redesigning it so that it follows more of the pattern of like Google Maps or Apple Maps. So maybe take a look at that, take a screenshot, and then mirror what they did here. I'm going to focus a little bit on these cards though. So I think regardless of what you do, you'll probably need some sort of card design. And for this one, I'm noticing that the type hierarchy of each of these sections is a little bit difficult to navigate. So I'm not sure when I see this, like what is important. So I see bus 121. I'm assuming if you are a native in the area, you know what 121 is. Then I'm seeing 36 minutes. And I'm like, okay, like that seems good. So maybe I should go. But the other issues I see here are there's a lot of information here. It's like, oh, the bus departs at 9:50 and now it's 10 a.m. I don't know what that means actually. Is it now it's 10 a.m. or is it? I think it's late. So the bus is late at 10 a.m. And then there's also this other thing here where it's saying you walk 10 minutes and then you bus 20 minutes and then you walk 6 minutes. And so I think there's a lot going on here in terms of the hierarchy. And so I would recommend iterating on this component specifically and thinking about what elements that the user is most interested in seeing first. So I'm going to go ahead and get my phone and put some screenshots in here of other transit apps that we can be inspired by. Okay, so I'm back. I got a few examples. The one on the left here is Apple Maps, and then the one on the right here is my favorite one, which is called City Mapper. So again, like I mentioned, most of them do this thing. I guess this one both of them attach the search bar with the list of elements, which makes sense, I think, because then it takes up less space and then the map has more space and then everything is more connected. But they both have this sheet that comes up that kind of like takes over the part of the map and then you can kind of see where you're going, but then you can also see all the options. Then I noticed something interesting. Both of these use different styles of suggested transportation options. So City Mapper, I think, assumes that you know-ish what these things mean. They're like, take the B, and then you will need to wait this long to get to for the next train to come. 18 minutes is pretty long, but you have to wait this long. This is how much it is, and then total will take this much time. So I think that makes sense. I think it's also interesting that they show you like, oh, it'll take 35 minutes if you want to walk, which is actually faster than taking the train. In Apple Maps, they do this thing. I think Google has this too, where they have the tabs like this, and then they have all the different elements down here, which is kind of similar to what you have outlined here. I'm assuming this Go might be inspired by this here. And so I think looking at this, they clearly have prioritized the number of minutes it takes to get there. And then they don't really prioritize all this information down here. They really want you to press go. And so I think the biggest takeaway is that I would recommend redesigning this card so that there's more of a clear focus. Right now, everything's kind of meshing together. I don't know what focus you want to use, but an example might be, I'm gonna grab this over here. I hope no one ever opens this Figma file because I'm making it very chaotic. So there is some sort of drop shadow here. Okay, so a few ideas. A few ideas. I'm gonna make this really big. Oh no, this file is such a disaster. Okay, I made the people move too. Okay, let me recopy everything over. Okay, cool. So we have these cards. So for example, if you want the 36 minutes to be the most important part, you can make that bigger. One thing I am noticing is this is all one text box. It might be easier to separate them out into different text boxes so that every single type style has its own text box. So maybe I have this and it's 24 might be too big. So maybe it's 20. And then do we need to show the from Washington Street and State Street? I don't know. These two both don't show it. So actually this does here. Okay, maybe we should show it. But if you want to keep it, maybe you can make it a little smaller. A lot of it is about prioritizing the things that you want to show. Maybe it's gray. I'm introducing new colors. Oh no. Okay. Then we have this big go button. Maybe it's here. Next, I don't know how important this is, but I think one thing is that because it's the same weight as the 36 minutes, it might make more sense to put it down here so that the 36 minutes can shine and this can still be seen as well. Again, for this, there's like a random drop shadow on it, so I'd probably remove it. Also, if possible, try to use the same icon set. You could also try using an emoji too. I'm getting distracted, but you could try using an emoji if you want. That might be kind of cute. Okay. One other thing is that these rounded corners, you should make sure that they look like they fit inside each other. So you might need to experiment with how rounded it is so that it looks like they're fitting within each other. I'll leave it at that for now. You can also create this with auto layout as well. Next, I don't know how much this is needed, but if you want to add it, you might want to put it maybe next to the bus, or even like, I think for this one, they showed the bus inline, so maybe you could combine the 121 information with this. I don't know. I'm gonna go delete this for now. And then for this, I think maybe there's some way to combine the bus departs at 9:50 and now it's departing at 10. So maybe you could say like you could maybe only have, oops, maybe you could only have the now 10 a.m. or departing at 10 a.m. But maybe this is in red so that people know that it's late. You can even have the little icon if you want as well, like this. Nothing is aligned, but it's okay. Maybe you can try something like that. Not sure. I still think the hierarchy is messed up, so I would probably recommend doing something like this or something, maybe. It still feels really wonky because right now this is a box and this is a box, and so because they're both boxes, the visual hierarchy feels a little bit off balance. So I think I would recommend spending a little bit more time on this, especially if you want to indicate this departing at 10 a.m. indicator, and you want to indicate this bus number, I would try to prioritize which one is the most important because I think if I were designing this, I would recommend deleting a few things and focusing on the key elements and showing the less key elements once you tap on the actual instructions. So notice how this feels a lot cleaner. If you want to prioritize other elements, like for example, the bus number, you can also do that as well. So if I want to prioritize the bus number, maybe I can do something like this, where the bus number is front and center and the 36 minutes is underneath or something like that. That is also an option as well. Here, notice how I don't like how these are both boxy because I think it's a little bit distracting. There's too many box elements. And so I would probably recommend doing something like they did here, where these are slightly different, very, very obviously a different style. So maybe you could try making this a little bit more muted or something so that it feels a little bit less like in your face. But again, it's really up to you and your personal style. I do not like what I just did, so maybe there's something else you can try. But yeah, I think overall you are doing really great. Those are a few suggestions for how you might be able to improve the design, but that is all I have time for today. If you are interested in a critique like this, where I kind of break apart the specifics of redesign, definitely reach out and I'll take a look at your work and let you know if it's a good fit. Thanks.